Friend, Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Some years back at the University of Wisconsin, a group of literary students formed a club. And the purpose of the club was to criticize. The members would submit stories, and it would be dissected heartlessly with no punches pulled. They just criticized each other. The sessions were so brutal that club members dubbed themselves the Stranglers. This was a masculine group, so the girls on campus formed the Wranglers. And they read manuscripts also, but the criticism was much gentler and more constructive. Every effort, however feeble, was encouraged. 20 years later, an alumnus made an analysis of his classmates' careers. And what do you think he discovered? He discovered that not one of the Stranglers had made a literary career of any kind. But out of the Wranglers had come a dozen successful writers. It's a really interesting story. The Stranglers had fulfilled their name very well. They took developing talent, and by excessive criticism, they strangled it. The Wranglers, by use of constructive criticism, lift their struggling talent to its feet so it could climb to success. Now, this is not just a simple statistic. It's an issue of great Jewish significance. The guideline for criticism is an important issue raised in this week's Torah portion. Only with just a few words, but I started researching this thing and my mind kind of blew away, if it had blown away already. The Torah states, and it's a very interesting sentence that you can dissect it in different ways. And I'm going to read it in one way, and some people could read another. Let me only read it to you in English. It says, "You shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart." Your brother, really. That's what the Hebrew says. "You should surely rebuke your kin, but incur no guilt on their account." It's another word in the Hebrew is hocheach tochiach, which means you shall certainly rebuke, criticize. So the issue becomes, what does it mean to rebuke? That's the translation. When must you do it? When shouldn't you do it? And how should it be done? Now, it's a very complicated subject. I mean, when people say, well, what does Judaism think? The Bible only really is the beginning of things. And one of the reasons that I went to the Jewish Theological Seminary for rabbinical school is that the focus was studying rabbinic material, like the Talmud and whatever. I was no Talmudic genius, but it became how I look at things. So over the last 2,000 years, the rabbis over the time, starting with the Talmud and going forward, there were different views of how you deal with this issue. And there are two Talmudic passages that I want to share with you. And yes, I want to get out that at the New Reformed Temple, on Friday night, we're learning Talmud. Yeah, I want that out there. We're not talking about the weather. We're talking about something serious. I want that to be known, okay? Who's going to go out there and shout from this? We study Talmud. Deanna's going to do it, I can tell. So this is one Talmudic passage. These aren't complicated. One is from Tractate Arachin, which says the following. From where do we know that one who sees something wrong about his friend should rebuke him? Because it said one should surely rebuke. In other words, it's that doubling, the Hebrew doubling. Hocheach tochiach. How do you know that one should continue to rebuke if his first attempt doesn't achieve the desired results? In other words, you criticize once, it's not working. We are taught this from the emphasis expressed through, as I said, the word tochiach, which is doubled. And to what extent should one rebuke, the Talmud asks? Rav, the sage, says, until one is hit. Shmuel says, until one is cursed. And Rabbi Yochanan says, until one is scorned. In other words, you chastise up to a point until someone's going to say, if you don't stop, Alan, I'm going to hit you. So according to this text, one should continue to rebuke even though there's no possibility that his words will be accepted, even to the extent that he is physically assaulted or cursed. It's the kind of rebuking that keeps on giving. Okay, could someone repeat back what the Talmud says there? Okay, you could. It's very simple. Okay, let's go to a second Talmudic text. Not only are you to tell them we studied one Talmudic text, we're going to say we studied two Talmudic texts. Okay, so this is from Yevamot, and I love this. It's really interesting. It says, Rabbi Ilai, in the name of Rav Elazar, the son of Rav Shimon, just so there is a mitzvah, a commandment to say something that will be accepted, so there is a mitzvah for a person not to say something that will not be accepted. Well, it's a mitzvah to shut up. Rabbi Akiva referred to this as a chovah, not commandment, but an obligation, based on the verse, do not rebuke a scorner, lest he hate you. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you. That's from Proverbs. It seems that from here that one should not rebuke someone if there's no possibility that the rebuke will be accepted. In other words, what's the point of criticizing somebody who's not going to listen? Which makes sense. So there are two different views here. There are multiple others. I'm very much simplifying it. There are different views. One is there's an absolute obligation. Another one is it's based on the possibility of success. Don't waste your time. Now, I told you it was complicated, and one of the things I like about Judaism is there is an agreement. You have to weigh one text against another, and one of the things that's great about, I think, the Jewish approach to everything is that you have to think and discern. It's not so clear-cut. You know, if you want clear answers, Judaism is not the right religion for you. No, I'm very serious. If you want to, I'm not criticizing any other religion because every other religion has certain ideas and approaches. But Judaism is a religion that requires discernment. You have to actually think about things, and you're not going to get such a clear-cut answer. And it's okay. It's okay to live with confusion because it keeps you on your toes and you're always thinking. So, okay, let's keep going. So there's all this back and forth, and there's this great sage named the Rambam Maimonides who lived in the 12th century. And now I want you to just go out and say that not only did we study two texts of the Talmud, we studied a text in the Mishneh Torah of Rambam. You're going to say the New Reform Temple is falling apart. So this is what Rambam says, and it's a very nuanced approach, and this is very practical. Every one of us can use what Rambam is teaching us. I mean, we should have it in our desk, in our office, or under our pillowcase at home. So he says, he puts it really straight, he says, it's a mitzvah, a requirement for a person who sees that his fellow Jew, and this is the language he's using, has sinned or is following an improper path, to correct his behavior and to inform him that he's causing himself to a loss by his evil deeds. In other words, you have to tell the person that they're doing something wrong. And it states, and you shall surely chastise, admonish, criticize your colleague. Rambam seems to affirm it's an obligation to do it. A person who rebukes a colleague, whether because of a wrong committed against him or because of a matter between his colleagues and God, I want you to focus in on this because we're going to come back to it, should rebuke him privately. Privately. He should speak to him patiently and gently, informing him that he only is making these statements for his colleagues' own welfare, to allow him to merit the life of the world to come. I'm only criticizing you for your own good. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to help you. And in this context, I want you to get to the world to come. Or whatever benefit you want, you can fill it in another way. If he accepts the rebuke, it's good. And if not, he should rebuke him a second and third time. Don't give up. Indeed, one is obligated to rebuke a colleague who does wrong until the latter strikes him and tells him, I will not listen. So you keep going until somebody, enough. Whoever has the possibility of rebuking sinners and fails to do so is considered responsible for that sin, for he has the opportunity to rebuke. In other words, if you don't rebuke something that you feel is wrong, you're guilty of the transgression yourself because you didn't try to stop it. A couple more lines. I mean, it's really good. At first, a person who acknowledges a colleague should not speak to him harshly until he becomes embarrassed. In other words, what happens is this: you admonish the person initially not so harshly, and then you increase the harshness until a point where the Talmud says, should you rebuke him to the point that his face changes color? In other words, there's a limit until the person's either totally embarrassed or livid. And the Torah states, you shall not bear a sin because of him. He seems to be leaning to the point where there's a limit. For this we learn that it's forbidden for a person to embarrass a fellow Jew. How much more so it is forbidden to embarrass him in public. Again, criticizing, but not public embarrassment. And even though a person who embarrasses a colleague is not liable for lashes, in other words, you're not going to get whipped, it's a great sin. And our sages said a person who embarrasses a colleague in public doesn't have a share in the world to come. In other words, you got to be really careful. Even though it's an obligation, you got to be really careful how you do it. And then the final point, therefore, a person should be careful not to embarrass a colleague, whether of great or lesser stature in public, and not to call him a name which embarrasses him or to relate a matter that brings him shame in his presence. Not embarrassing is just as important as rebuking. It's really, okay. So, Rambam's point is the method is as important as the intent. How we criticize is important as the obligation to criticize. There must be a humanistic dimension to it. Okay, so what does this have to do with anything? I want to share with you my own experience with this and in my own rabbinical career. And I know my rabbinical career is not different than other people's careers. In other words, what happens to you. In my experience, and there is one moment, I used to be a rabbi in Long Island, and I should get a Purple Heart for that. It was brutal, let me tell you. Ask Jane is in the back, she'll tell you. It was brutal, wasn't it? Yeah, it was brutal. Okay, so in my experience, the prohibition of confronting the other person publicly is probably the most relevant. And Rambam emphasizes even the most warranted act of criticism, it cannot lead to embarrassment. Okay, so here's the deal. I have been, and I'm being serious, we don't do this at the New Reform Temple. We're a whole, that's one of the reasons I love being here, and I think the temple is great. We're very civilized here and very thoughtful and kind, okay? But I have been at several board meetings in my 41 years of rabbinating. I don't know what the other would count. When a member of the board would raise a criticism directed to me in public. And I never heard of the criticism before. So I'm sitting there and someone, I don't have to fill in the blanks, you can imagine what it is. It had never been shared with me. The person never spoke to me privately. The person never asked for my perspective or my explanation. They just decided that publicly criticizing me was what they wanted to do. I guess they had a bad day at the office. My reaction has always been at that moment to say nothing, hoping that another person would shut it down. In Long Island, there was no shutdown. But after the fact, I reached out to this person. I would say, you know, I was surprised by your comments. Your perspective is important. I want to hear them, of course. Yet I never heard them before, and I find it uncomfortable to hear this criticism for the first time in this public forum. public criticism is forbidden in Judaism. That's not appropriate. It felt not like a criticism, I would say, but a desire for public embarrassment. And if you have some feedback for me, come to me privately and let's discuss it, and I will listen. To do otherwise is not Jewishly appropriate. To embarrass someone publicly is equivalent to murder. That's a pretty subtle. But everything I said was true. I mean, if you don't say it like that, no one gets it. It's not because your feelings are hurt. It's because the Torah is against it. Judaism says it's the worst thing you possibly can do. Even though rebuking is something that's an obligation, but you can never do it in a way that brings public humiliation. Now, this has great implications for us, the things that we do and how we say things to people. Do we say to people, just the difference between saying something, we're at the Onig Shabbat, and we want to say something to someone, that's why it's proper. Can we come over here and say it? Whatever it is. Public versus private is very crucial in Judaism. Now, trust me that the conversation I had wasn't pleasant. It usually leads to the other person saying, well, I meant no harm, yet, yes, I should have spoken to you privately, but I'm not always convinced that the remorse is authentic. Criticism given with kindness is a positive motive, and positive motivation is holy. That's what the Torah is saying to us. We do a great thing. Society depends on it. We're doing great good when we can point someone in a positive direction. Criticism given with insensitivity, thoughtlessness, perhaps even an ulterior motive is destructive. Let's choose the holy path. Shabbat Shalom.